Check, check, 1, 2, 1, 2. I hope everybody can hear me loud and clear out there. I am your host, the Nuclear Dad, and this is my third attempt at making this video, and hopefully we don't have any glitches. If we do, I will pre-record this and upload it to YouTube the good old-fashioned way, because I'm tired of the technical difficulties. But my mom has this saying: when God starts blessing, the enemy starts messing. And I don't know if this video is going to be a blessing. I mean, it could be. This is what's on my mind. And I feel like there are some relevant points as far as the life of Tupac and the main talking points that I like to touch on with my broadcasts. I feel like they coincide, and it's something that I need to say. So, long story short, the title is How Tupac Got Lost in the Shuffle. And if anybody's in the chat, could you let me know if you could hear me? Because again, third time trying to make this video. Every time I attempt, something crazy happens. It's almost like something doesn't want me to make this video. But I digress. So, how Tupac got lost in the shuffle? Hip hop, urban culture, the streets, it has a tendency to cannibalize young men. And we all know the wages of sin is death and all of that. And I'm not trying to cast a dark light on Tupac. What I'm saying is our choices seal our fate sometimes. And sometimes, we have a guiding light, a divine hand, an angel in our corner that can sometimes keep us out of trouble. And sometimes not so much. And we have a culture of fatherless boys, of lost men. It's almost like Peter Pan with the Island of Lost Boys, right? And Tupac was no exception. While he was exceptional as an artist, as a young man, he was very talented, but also he was lost. And we can see the changes throughout his career. If you follow hip hop, if you follow this person, or whether you just see what the media has said about him, doesn't matter. If you look back in history, it was a natural progression from who he was to who he ultimately became before he died. And he had a short run as far as fame goes. And it reminds me of the streets. If anybody's ever known any reputable young men out there, whether they were selling, robbing, hustling, stealing, shooting, they had a very short window. There's very few old cowboys, right? Their stars burn bright and they burn fast and they burnt out quickly. And they left the legacy of the legend and the stories that people tell about him. Even Jay-Z had once said in a song, even James Dean couldn't escape the allure of dying young, leaving a good-looking corpse. Of course. Now, in 91, and this is all going to circle back, in 91, he dropped his first album. Prior to that, he was with Digital Underground. If you remember the Humpty Dance, and he was in his movie with Chevy Chase called Nothing But Trouble, where they actually performed the song. It was big. Then Tupacalypse, I think it was Tupacalypse Now or Tupacalypse, his first album came out. And it was really, really positive. Brenda's Got a Baby, all of these things, right? I remember Marvin Gaye used to sing to me. He had me feeling like black was a thing to be. A lot of positivity and still some revolutionary speaking there, right? But from 92, from 92 when Juice came out until he died in 96, very short window. But in that time, he worked so much, he amassed so much content in the form of music and media exploits and news stories and being a topic of conversation when it comes to controversy. It seemed like he was alive a lot longer than he was. He's actually been dead longer than he's been alive. And it gives you something to think about. And again, like I said, hip hop is a culture of fatherless boys. Not saying all, I'm just saying lost young men who express their anger, they get out their frustrations in the form of music, and the people who relate to it most are these fatherless boys. And when I say relate to it, I mean from a reference standpoint, because we have people in the suburbs and people who are not directly related to the culture, in love with the culture, right? Now, in 92, Juice came out. And I don't know if Pac was a method actor, but to me, it seemed like after that movie came out, he embodied that character, Bishop. Loose cannon, very passionate, maybe a little crazy, some would say. I've heard stories about him. Never knew him personally. I mean, I was in the sixth grade when he died, and I remember exactly how I found out. I knew who he was because I knew his music, but I remember this kid who wasn't in our class, cutting class, terrorizing the hallways. He burst in the door, and the teacher was like, "What are you doing in here? You're not in this classroom." And he just started screaming out, "Tupac dead! Tupac's dead!" And then he running around the classroom, and people are laughing, but at the same time, we're in shock because the way we were presented the information was as shocking as the information itself. And of course, he was being disruptive. So the teacher chases him around a few times. He runs around a few desks. The teacher was a rather portly man. He wasn't very quick on his feet. And the kid ran out the room. And all day, that was the talk of the school. So I don't know how many classrooms he did this in, but I know in particular he came in my room, he burst in the room with a it startled everybody. And that's how we found out. So from 92, because I saw Juice when I was a kid. I should not have been watching Juice at 7. But honestly, it was no different than the things that I saw in the neighborhood, right? Like my mom took me to the movies to see New Jack City. So that just goes to show you, I don't want to say the level of parenting, but the things that I was exposed to via media as a kid. So seeing Juice, it wasn't too out of the norm of what I saw in everyday life. Because I'm from Philly. And, even back then, there was crazy stuff going on. Every neighborhood has one of these type of characters from these movies. Every neighborhood has an old dog. Every neighborhood has a bishop. Um, every neighborhood has a doughboy, and so on and so forth. Menace to Society, Boys in the Hood, Juice. It was normal, and they were always young men. And you had the older guys, but the older guys kind of laid in the cut. If you were a young guy, you really didn't know the older guys unless they were coming through giving out dollars, or all the young hustlers would gather around them and you would see the gold chains. And it was like a video. And those are the things that allure young men. It's the flash, it's the cars, it's the jewelry, it's the clothes, it's the women. And we get sucked in. And if you don't have a positive male role model, or if you do, it's hard to resist the temptation of that lore. Now, in my case, having a father, the temptation didn't work on me as early, but it still worked on me. And with a young man like Tupac, um, a man recently came out named Billy Garland, I believe is his name, who revealed that he is the biological father of Tupac. And he said he took a DNA test. Now, all this time, we thought that Tupac didn't have a father because his songs were so believable. He said, in one of the songs, "My pops died and I didn't cry because my anger wouldn't let me feel for a stranger." So that could have been a metaphor of, in his mind, his pops was always dead because the man that he was named after, the man he took his last name after, Matulu Shakur, was in jail since Tupac was a little boy. So with his biological father not being around and his stepfather not being around for his coming of age years, who knew who he hung around? I'm not going to say they weren't positive, but all we really have to go off of it is his music. I mean, he again said in one of his songs, "I hung out with the thugs, and even though they showed drugs, they showed a young brother love." So were the street guys his main sphere of influence? It would seem that way, but if you look at tapes that have been revealed recently of him as a young man, he went to a school for performing arts. He was a trained actor. He was a thespian. He was a poet. That's why his music sounded the way it did, almost like a Kendrick Lamar in a sense, where it's several layers to the music. But I think Pac had a little bit more passion than Kendrick. Kendrick is after my time. I don't discredit his talent, but I don't feel him in my gut like I felt Tupac, and I think a good amount of people in my age range can say the same thing. But in this short window from 91 to 96 when he died, so many things happened. And I truly think that he was led astray because after Juice came out, like I said, I think he's a method actor. I think he embodied the spirit of Bishop because shortly after that, there was an altercation in 93 where he shot two off duty cops. And he took that to trial. He beat it. But then again, in 93, a month later, after shooting the cops, he gets accused of the R word, which you can't say on YouTube, but it rhymes with grape. He gets accused of raping a young lady, right? And there's a trial for that. And a year later, in 94, the day before he gets the verdict of the trial, he gets shot up in New York. This is a short span. Think about all of this. He shoots two cops. Tupac shoots two cops. That actually rhymes. Then he gets accused of this assault on this young lady. While he's on trial for the assault, he gets shot in New York. And then after he comes out of the hospital, he goes to prison. Now, while he's in prison is when he gets introduced to Suge Knight. And after he gets out of prison in 95, he's officially death row. And he's holding a grudge this whole time, saying that it was a setup. Him getting shot was a setup. And we all know the story behind that, the East Coast, West Coast thing. But he worked harder than anybody during his time and maybe after him. Because again, his run was only from 91 to 96. And in that time, in that 1 year after he got out of jail and got with Death Row, he released 2 albums. First time I ever remember seeing a double CD was Tupac, or a double tape at the time. I had the cassette tape. But he's released like 10, 12 albums since he's died. I could be getting my numbers wrong. Point being, his star burned bright. It burnt fast, and it burnt out fast. But at the end of the day, the things that led up to his demise was, again, somebody being influenced by the wrong people, by the wrong sphere of influence. Now, the gentleman who is recently been locked up for the murder is a notorious gentleman on the West Coast. Now, he is from the opposite side of Suge Knight. If you understand what I'm saying, gang culture, red and blue, Suge was red. The gentleman that ultimately has been arrested is on the blue side. Now, the story goes, I'm pretty sure everybody knows, but Tyson fight, Las Vegas, Tupac and the homies, they beat up this guy, and his death was in retaliation. Now, there's some other stories about his death being some whole conspiracy. I'm not getting into that. The main talking point is how not having a father can lead men, young men, boys down a dark path. If there was somebody positive in Tupac's corner, he shouldn't even have been at that fight. He should now, granted, as hard as he worked, he probably could have afforded to take a break. But imagine if he didn't get sidetracked with the BS, with the drama, with the girls. Imagine if we would have had 5 to 10 more years of Tupac, where things would be. Because I heard interviews of him talking about starting a political party, starting a black political party. Don't know how that ultimately would have worked out in the end, but imagine in a different world if we had 10 more years of Tupac, if there was some people in his circle that was like, nah, we not gonna go to these parties. We not gonna hang out with them. I know that's how you feel, but we not gonna say it on camera. Imagine if it was organized. Imagine if the people that he was around were really gangsters, like they say, organized. Because there's a whole other type of gangster, and all kind of things go on that we never hear about. If you've ever watched The Wire, remember that season 2 when they were at the docks? They were getting that stuff off the ships. That's organization. The mafia still operates today, but they're organized. Not to say they don't do what they do, but they make sure these young men don't get caught up and lost in the shuffle. Because as smart as he was, as talented as he was, as much of a genius as he was, there wasn't the equal counterparts to keep him on track, to make sure the world got more of him and he got more of his potential out into the world before ultimately his star burned out. Because only in hip hop do you see this type of destruction. And old school rapper named Special Ed came out and said that NWA led to the destruction of rap culture and hip hop. I'm not arguing with that, and I'm not agreeing with it, but I think it's an interesting point. I think that what he was trying to, I'm not even going to guess what he was trying to convey, but I understood what he was saying. I understood looking at the life of Tupac as a object of study of how these young men with these potential can be turned into tools of destruction that ultimately destroys themselves. And then the people on the outside looking in see them as an example and think this is the most natural course of action. To be wild, to be dangerous, to put all of your business out on Front Street. A little bit of reserve is something that comes to mind. What if these young, dangerous gentlemen had a little bit of reserve? What if they had a father in their corner? What if they had a man or a group of men in their corner where no matter what you say, this is not how you operate. And if you cross the line and go out of the orders of operation, then you're going to get dealt with accordingly. Because as a dad, I got to keep my sons in check and understand what it's like to have a father and not have a father. Because I was the only child growing up that I knew that had a dad. And I think a lot of kids hung out at my house because they wanted to see if the dad thing was true. I say it jokingly, but a part of me really believes that a lot of my friends just came to my house because there was a dad there. They knew it was a little bit more structured than what they were used to. And as we got older, all of those young men I knew that didn't have dads, they all went to the streets. Some of them came back, some of them didn't. And while Tupac didn't necessarily go to the streets, he embodied the ideology of young men in the street. We're going to take what's ours. We're going to knock on the door. If you don't let us in, we're going to kick it down. And while there is a place for that, there still should be an elder leadership that shows these young men how to move, to make sure that they're around to teach the next generation what was taught to them. And unfortunately, we lost somebody great. Regardless of what people say about him, regardless of what people feel about him, I've heard all kind of conspiracies. I've heard all kind of things. First of all, you're not supposed to talk bad about the dead. That's a cardinal rule. So I lose a little bit of respect for people who talk about the type of person he was when he's not here to defend himself. I think anybody that talks bad about the dead, whether they were good or bad, is a sucker. Take it how you want to take it. But the fact of the matter remains that there wasn't a visible presence of male leadership, elder male leadership in his life to make him rethink some of his choices and calculate some of his steps and his moves a little more precisely. Because again, where would the world be if we had 5 to 10 more years of a Tupac? A lot of rappers, a lot of entertainers that we see as awesome, we wouldn't think that. Imagine if Michael Jackson died in the 80s after Thriller. It's the equivalent. We would have never got some of the great music from the 90s that Michael Jackson put out. Same with Prince. What if Prince would have died right after Purple Rain? We would have never got some of the great music. And Tupac was up there with a Michael Jackson or a Prince or a, what's my man who died? The guitarist, Jimi Hendrix. Tupac was up there with a Jimmy, right? And it just makes me think of how these young men conduct themselves now, because he's the prototype, he's the blueprint. Especially now with the new rap that's out, where they talk, they killing each other, and then they making songs about it. I ain't judging, but there needs to be some men to hold these young men accountable. And sometimes I think, like, can you even talk to them? I don't know, because I don't have sons that age. I'm not in contact with young men now who are the up and coming rappers, but I see that the talent is, I don't want to say not as good, but is definitely dumbed down. The message is a lot more negative. The passion might still be there, but there'll never be another Tupac. And unfortunately, he's a young man that got lost in the shuffle. And when we talk about him, we talk about all the great things he did, good or bad, but we lost him way too soon. And I think if we don't step up as men in the community, whether your sons become rappers, whether they become scientists or engineers, we got to keep them away from these bloodsuckers. We got to keep them away from these leeches. We got to keep them away from these bad influences that will ultimately have them lost in the shuffle, just like Tupac. I'm going to keep this short. Hopefully everything came through. It's my third attempt at making this. There will not be a fourth. Go get the Datitude Journal. If you got kids, go on Amazon, check out the Datitude Journal, because you never know how much time you got on this planet. So if you're going tomorrow or next week, at least you got something that you could have left to give them the foundational blueprint. Maybe they don't hear your voice, but maybe they can see your writing and understand your words. And it's something that they could pass to their kids and maybe even add on to. Maybe it can become a family heirloom to where men can teach men how to be men in written form in case we're not here to see them grow up for whatever reason. Check out thenucleardad.com. Enjoy the rest of your day. Nuclear Dad out. Rest in peace, Tupac.